Here's Golf to Go with Frank LaRosa.
Dottie Pepper's a 17-time winner on the LPGA Tour, including 2 major championships. She also represented the U.S. 6 times in the Solheim Cup, compiling a 13-5-2 record, including 5-1 in singles play. She played the LPGA Tour from 1988 until her retirement in 2004, when she began a career in television that has covered every major in men's golf and nearly every major in women's professional golf. She was the first woman to announce live golf at the Masters in 2016, and in 2020 became the first walking reporter to cover that same event. She was the 2016 William D. Richardson Award winner, given by the Golf Writers Association of America for her continuing contributions to the game of golf. Currently the lead walking reporter for CBS Sports coverage of the PGA Tour, PGA Championship, and Masters, and the lead analyst for CBS's LPGA coverage. She's also the author of the recently released book, Letters to a Future Champion, My Time with Mr. Pulver. Welcome, Dottie Pepper, to People Who Play the Game.
Thank you, Frank. Thanks.
You know,
I think that intro just means I don't sleep much.
I was just going to say, you know, with no apparent slowdown in sight, you know, do you ever have time to kind of sit back and marvel at all that you've accomplished?
Well, I don't know about marvel at what I've accomplished. I do know it's time to slow down though, because we've had a dog that's been sick in the hospital all week, and I think he's telling us to just slow down, spend a little more time at home, and this is exactly what the schedule is going to bring for us over these next couple of months, because I am off until CB starts again in January, so it's time to park it.
Excellent, good for you. Let's kind of wander through this career. Let's start back at the beginning. How did you get introduced to golf? Who put a club in your hand the first time?
My dad's mom did, so it was my paternal grandmother. She, after my grandfather died, she was still relatively young and active. She was a really good athlete in her own, a big German woman, about 5'10" and a size 11 shoe. So she was a substantial figure,
yes,
very fit, skied, played golf. And she thought it'd be great if her oldest granddaughter would hang out with her if she showed any interest in golf. And I did. So she bought me a set of Chichi Rodriguez Jr. irons by Northwestern with a 3-iron in it. Who in the world would put a 3-iron in a child's hand today? A 1-wood, a 2-wood, 3, 5, 7, 9, and a putter. But who would put a tiny little 3-iron in a kid's hand today? No one. Anyway, but that's what I learned on. And she bought me a series of 5 lessons from a journeyman professional who came through this area every year to play the ponies and teach a little golf. Because Saratoga is such a big part of the horse racing world through the summer. It was just 4 weeks and then now 7. But that was really my beginning. And then after I got adept enough in those 5 lessons, I started on a short course that the state runs here in Saratoga Springs as a par 29.
Wow.
And from then we went to Brookhaven, where my mentor, and who ended up being my mentor, was actually the golf course architect. So moved on to the bigger courses in the area, but cut my teeth mostly for the bulk of my junior career. I spent at McGregor Links, which was Devereaux Emmett Gem, not 3 miles from where I live now, and less than a mile from where I grew up. So I was really fortunate where I grew up, when I grew up, and the atmosphere I grew up in.
That's amazing. When did the competition start, and when did the competition actually kind of take hold of you?
I played in my first junior club championship. I think I must have been, I was either 11 or 12. And it was boys and girls blended. Of course, me being the weakest of the players in the whole field, I got matched against the number 1 player. And his name was David Hayes, and he played at Corinth High School. And David ended up being a very, very good player. And I had one older member come up to me before the match started. I think David was maybe about a 3 handicap at the time when he was 16, 17 years old. And a member came up to me and asked what I was going to do for the last 8 holes of the match, because I would be out. And I said, well, I haven't really thought about that, so I'm just going to go play. And I didn't have to worry about it, because he had to play 7 holes with me after we finished. I did manage to tie 1 hole in the match, but that was my that was my illustrious beginning. I played a lot of golf against older ladies in this area because there wasn't a whole lot of junior girls golf. I played on the high school boys golf team. We didn't have a girls team until 2 years ago. It was a kind of a COVID blessing that the girls golf started here in Saratoga Springs, and a Section 2 championship, so the girls could now even qualify for the state championship. So that's taken a long time, but that's turned around. But that was really my start in amateur golf, and I didn't start playing in state junior tournaments until I was 14. It was just the junior girls, I guess I was, yeah. I guess I was 13. It was my dad had to kind of hold me back. I was trying to find all these tournaments to go play in, and him being a professional athlete, he knew too much too soon was not the way this project was going to be successful.
Your dad was a baseball player, right?
He was. He came up through the Detroit Tigers organization, signed the day he graduated from high school.
Wow.
And ended up on the cover of Sports Illustrated as one of the best rookies in the league in 1968. I think the cover date was March 11th. And just to his left was a guy by the name of Johnny Bench. He turned out to be pretty good.
he played catcher, I think, or something
he
like
did.
that.
My dad was a left-handed hitting first baseman.
So when did I want to talk about your book, but probably a little later in the conversation. But I just want to know, kind of in the stream of things, when did Mr. Pulver come into your life?
He came into my life in letter writing when I was 13, turned 14. I had gone to the state championship and looking for more ideas of tournaments to play that were close by. I was really struggling to find entry forms. You didn't have a paper entry form in those days. You didn't really have any place. It's not like you could get on the internet and go to the AJGA site or the State Golf Association site and find tournaments to play in. So he put me in touch with and helped me also with the things that he would still be getting in the mail as a retired PGA professional. So the first letters went back to early 1980. And so I wasn't yet 15 years old. And we started really just being pen pals. And he had come to my dad's driving range often as a retired professional. And he would tinker around. His wife would come up and hit balls. She was a very good player. His daughter, Madeline, really good player. Son, George, who was my dad's age, actually was quality enough to threaten the state championship. I mean, really excellent athlete, excellent player. So he still dabbled in it, even though he was retired. And I was really fortunate because I got up the gumption one winter afternoon to write to his daughter, Madeline, asking if this man I'd admired from afar would consider taking me on as a student. And what I did not know was that Martha, his wife, was 4 days from passing.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So he said, my current plans, he wrote, typed a letter and sent it to my house and said, my current plans are a bit in disarray, and I had no idea she was as bad as she was, but I will be back to you as soon as things sort of work themselves out, and I would be pleased to look at you at a more close-up range than from a distance. So she passed, and as it turned out, the kids were really worried about Mr. Pulver, and because they were, as I say in the book, they were sort of like the Fredricksons in the movie Up. They were attached at the hip and did everything together. They were Carl and Ellie. They were magic together. And she would be, out there playing a few holes at night at McGregor at Brookhaven, and he'd still be out there taking soil samples and taking them off to the lab, and always had his hands in it. So they did all that stuff together. So the kids were understandably worried about him when his way big half was missing, and it turns out that I guess we both needed each other.
Meant to be.
Yeah.
So we'll jump ahead a little bit. We'll get back to the book because the book is really important, obviously. But you went from a starter set with a 3-iron to being a 3-time All-American at Furman.
I did, with the skinny blades in my bag.
Tell me about your college career.
I was fortunate to end up at Furman. I made just 2 recruiting trip visits. One to TCU. They ended up being national champions in that time frame, and then to Furman. And I ended up at Furman primarily because I wrote a letter to, of all places, Clemson, as about a 13-year-old. And it was sent down the road to Furman, or back up the road, I suppose, about 30 miles, because until even about 5 years ago, Clemson didn't have a women's golf program. It was in the region I wanted to go to. So I went into the dot matrix printer in the guidance counselor's office, and you plug in just a few little ideas or filters that you can put in. And I wanted to be in communications somewhere south of the Mason-Dixon line, and it had to have a golf team.
And
So
that's what popped up.
So that's what popped up. So it was among the letters that I wrote was to Clemson. And fortunately, the head coach, the men's coach there at the time, worked the camp at Clemson with the head coach at Furman. And he said, Willie Miller, I think you ought to look at this girl. So that's where I ended up.
And sometime soon after that, you turned professional. What do you remember about that first professional tournament? What kind of sticks with you?
My first, well, I had been a member of the '86 Curtis Cup team, which meant I had an exemption into the U.S. Open that year, and also, or following year in '87. But I had to give that up because you still had to be an amateur. So my first real foray into professional golf was with no money in my pocket. I had to go to I had a CD that was waiting to mature in August from my grandmother who started me in the game, but I couldn't touch it without penalty. So I went to him for a $5,000 loan that would get me through about 6 weeks as I could figure playing Futures Tour event, and I had to go to US Open qualifying. So that was my first jump to try to get my spot back in the field that I gave up from turning professional, and I ended up being medalist. So that got me started, and went to the Open a couple of weeks later. We didn't graduate until late in June. Went to the Open 2 or 3 weeks later, and I think I finished tied 12th. And I made about $12,000, and I turned right around and handed my grandfather that $5,000, and I said, I promised you I'd pay it back, and here it is. So I had enough money, to get through those first few weeks, and then wait for that CD to mature, so I could pay for the entry to Q School.
17 wins and huge Solheim Cup effort and 2 majors. What's the greatest moment for you in your professional career?
Being a part of the first Solheim Cup team was pretty darn special.
I'll bet,
because it was announced at the LPGA Championship. I remember Charlie Meacham saying that this event was going to model. We're going to model this after the Ryder Cup. It'll be held in November at Lake Nona. The United States is going to host the first. America versus Europe, just like the Ryder Cup. And oh, by the way, points have already started to accrue. So everybody's doing the math. Where do I look on the standings? And I ended up I was in pretty decent shape, but now I had a real focus, not only winning golf tournaments in 1990, but accruing points for this first Solheim Cup. And I was the last automatic person on by points. There were only 8 on each side, so I was 7th in the points, and Nancy Lopez was the pick. So that was a pretty special moment. But I think as far as winning a golf tournament, the 1995 event at Stratton Mountain was the only tournament that my family was around to see me win. My parents are young. My dad's still working, and they were able to drive to Stratton. It was hour and a half from here in Saratoga Springs. And I won pretty convincingly, but it came down to a close battle on Sunday. Played a great final round, but it was the Pepper clan from Eastern New York versus the Pat Bradley clan from Boston, and it was loud. And it was a lousy day. It was typical New England summer day in the mid to low 50s and raining, and just typical lousy weather that Mr. Pulver always talked about being able to play in and being prepared to play in. And it turned out to be what I think was my most meaningful win, because my family was able to be there. The assistant professional at my club where I grew up at McGregor was the head professional there. I was about to turn 30. There were pranks played on me all week long. And it was crazy. We passed the chalice around. It's a beautiful trophy there. I have the smaller version in my office, but the bigger version, the head professional had, and we filled it with vodka and cranberry, passed it around the room. It was a huge celebration that night. So I think that was my favorite.
Well, it just prompts another question. What was Karsten Solheim like in those early days, and his notion that the Solheim Cup was going to be something special?
He was LPGA wouldn't be where it is today without the foundational stability that Karsten Solheim and Ping provided for it. They had players on their staff. They were really great about providing equipment to the players. They always hosted the tournament in Phoenix, and then to change things for women's golf on both sides of the pond, really, with the Solheim Cup. He was, gosh, I mean, he was such a forward thinker about what the women could be doing, trying to emulate what was happening in the Ryder Cup and how important that was. The game of golf for the women wouldn't be anything what it looks like now if it wasn't for Karsten and Louise as well.
Sure. That one kind of gave me a little goosebumps. That's kind of an exciting description. Injuries cut your career short, and shortly after you retired, or maybe concurrently, television came calling. So there's a whole new career there. What was that like?
It was pretty concurrent, because the event that I announced that I was going to hang it up at the end of the season, I didn't even really make it to the end of the season because my back and neck were so bad, but it was at the US Women's Open, and I had gotten a special exemption by the USGA to get there, and ended up on Monday of that week in Rochester, Minnesota, on exam table with needles in my back and all sorts of awful things, looking for all sorts of bad things that are going on. And I just realized, came to me that this is enough. I'm spending more time in rehab or trying to find out how my body's breaking down than I am practicing to get better. And I wasn't the kind of player that was going to be content with looking at cut numbers. I wanted to figure out how it was to win golf tournaments. And I knew I couldn't prepare the way I knew how to prepare or needed to prepare to win. So it was time to go to that plan B that my dad always told me I needed. So I needed it in 2004. And fortunately, I had a great advocate in a statistician at NBC Sports named John Goldstein, who said to the producer, Tommy Roy, I think you ought to take a chance at her. She's got an opinion. She's going to be prepared, and she might just be okay at it. And Tommy took me under his wing, and he really worked hard with me. I had Judy Rankin be so important. My first television job was because of her in 1999, the women's amateur in Baltimore, or at the Biltmore Forest in Asheville. I just picked her brain for the entire time I was up there as a walking reporter at the women's amateur. Had a player go completely stark, can't say a word, empty in an interview. First time I'd ever done television. So I sort of got thrown in the deep end there. Her name was Dorothy Dellison, who ended up being a Curtis Cup player, a Solheim Cup player, and just a great gal. But she was speechless. She was so overcome by the whole moment that I asked her the questions, there was nothing coming out. So that was my real foray into it. But if I don't, my career wouldn't have had the start and the longevity and kind of the foundation that it has if it hadn't been for Tommy Roy's belief in me and John Goldstein saying, hey, Tommy, you got to take a shot on Dot.
As a viewer, that's how I would describe you. You're honest, and you do have an opinion. What, from your point of view, inside, what's happening? What is it you're trying to do?
Tommy told me from the first bit that I want you to talk about what you're doing on the golf course as a reporter as you would see it as a player. And I have continued to try to use that in the back of my mind every time I talk about golf, as I saw it as a player, as I thought about it as a player, as I felt about it as a player. I knew when I was getting nervous and what would happen. So everybody gets nervous. So I think it's important to relay that to the viewer as well. But he also, when it came to having an opinion. So, the guy sitting in the main seat at NBC at the time, Johnny Miller, had some pretty solid opinions about things. And
yes,
his
sir.
mic, which was a Tommy thing, was to have Johnny's mic always open. So he could comment on any hole, on any player, on any shot at any time. That was pretty new in the industry. And he also said to me, when I did my first PGA Tour event for them in 2005, it was at Doral. And he said, I want you to remember another thing. If you have an opinion and you've done your research and you know something to be true and Johnny disagrees with you, you go ahead and tell him you don't agree and tell him why. And I said, okay, I can do that.
Wow.
So that's pretty liberating, pretty powerful.
Oh, amazing.
whippersnapper coming into this new world of television, and really not, I wasn't breaking any glass or grass ceiling because Judy Rankin did that. But, I'm on the PGA Tour, and I'm, with the regulars at that time were Vijay Singh, Tiger Woods, Phil Mickelson, and you just go on and on and on. Ernie Els. This was a big deal. And to have somebody like that have the faith in me and give me the confidence and the wherewithal to just go ahead and be myself, and also value doing homework, not just to be able to disagree with somebody, but to be prepared to not have any surprises.
Sure. And Johnny obviously did have opinions, but the few times I was able to interview him, I found him to be very amenable to somebody arguing with him about it.
Yeah. Oh, he liked that. He liked that. I don't think he always listened, but he liked that part.
So, you're going on, you're doing this television, you're getting recognized, you're enjoying yourself, you're here and there, and all of a sudden this idea, I'm gonna write a book, pops into your head. How did that all come about?
Well, I think the foundation was laid probably coming up on 12 years ago, when my husband David was going through my 3-ring binder of Mr. Pulver's letters, and he said, you have a book here. And I said, no, you're very biased. That's very nice of you to say, but those are my personal letters, and there's a lot of good stuff in there, but I don't think anybody else would really be that interested. And B, who has the time to do that? I mean, it's 2008, 9, 10 in there. I don't have the time to do that. I've just moved home. I'm working full time. At the time, I was doing coming up on 30 events a year for NBC. I was all over the place. So it, by the way, takes a lot of time to write a book, and especially if you're going to self-publish it the way I did. So with the pandemic and the big time shutdowns in upstate New York, with the amount of material the family had given me after Mr. Pulver had passed, I thought it was the time to do something positive with that time when we were, relegated to staying home or not going very far from home. And I wanted to do something positive. I didn't want to just sit here on the couch and watch pretty sad news coming across the country, across the world. I wanted to let's dive into this. And I also wanted to really work on my immune system, get fitter. So that kicked into high gear. So in other words, I was in my basement a lot, either on the bike or working on my book. But early on in that whole process, David had actually gone down to a meeting at Baltusrol. So I was home alone for the entire day. And I came across the forbidden file from Mr. Pulver. He never wanted me looking so I could read all the golf magazines I wanted, but I could only read about people and places. I could not read about mechanics and swing philosophies or anything like that, because he knew how he wanted to teach me, and he knew how I would absorb that information. He didn't want to be unteaching things. So when George Jr. got a hold of a lot of his dad's stuff, he gave me a fair amount of it. And one of them was it was a blue binder, pretty beat up, and all it just said was swing articles, golf swing articles. I figured after 35 years, it was okay to open that folder to see what was in there. And it was exactly what I thought it would be, Frank. It was going back to 1960, articles that had been torn out of or cut out of newspapers or golf magazines. And they were highlighted, underscored with his scratching in the margins, whether he agreed or not, things that he thought were important. And when I started going through them, I thought, well, I should put these in chronological order, see how these sort of roll out and what's really in this thing. And I was totally shocked, because what I also found sprinkled in with all of those articles were all of the letters I had written to him.
Wow.
So I lost it. I absolutely lost it, because it just became really obvious that relationship that it meant so much to me was a two-way street. So I said, David, when he got back, I said, I got a bigger project on my hands than I thought I did. I had this idea really to just the book of the letters that he had written to me. It was going to be a lot like Peter Thompson's book before he passed. It was a paperback book, pretty modest, and it was really letters and articles that Peter had written. He put it together in a really nice little, almost like a booklet. It became very obvious that we needed to do something better and really tell the story. So we started digging on his timeline. I hired my intern at CBS to do Mr. Pulver's timeline, because now I'm having to go back and fact check all of these articles. I'm really trying to turn myself inside out for the reader, and ran it by the family, and they were all gun ho. They started going through their own stuff. I get envelopes every week of things that they've gone through in boxes, and amazingly supportive. And so that's what happened. Found a designer. The publisher came to me through his daughter, Madeline, the middle child. She was in the media and print and this television or a newspaper world her entire life. And she had just had a friend publish with Mission Point Press in Traverse City, Michigan, and said, I don't know what, he said he had a really good experience. Maybe you ought to call Doug Weaver. So I called Doug Weaver and I pitched the idea and pitched it to one other person. And it was clear that Doug Weaver got it and wanted to do the project, was going to take it on himself instead of sending it to somebody else in his company. And then you have to have a designer, and went to one person because there was only one person to do this. And that was Martin Miller at Miller Brown in Sacramento. I knew Martin, worked with him on stuff at the Masters. My husband had worked with him on the original rules of golf at the Honorable Company at Muirfield. And there was only one person that was going to get this project, and he jumped all over it. So I had the right people and the right message, and it pretty cool.
That's an amazing story, and Martin is a friend of mine, and he, I'm not sure I ever heard that story. I mean, we don't see each other that much, but
Yep.
that, all around you, there's all these things going on. There's all these stories going on. There's connections, and
Right.
it's fun when you uncover them.
Yeah.
What's the most endearing memory or thought? I mean, when you think about Mr. Pulver today, what comes through?
His message was always very real, that it was going to be difficult to be a professional, whether you chose to be in the club side of it or on the touring side of it, that you're going to give up your holidays, your family time. There are going to be sacrifices, but he was always extraordinarily positive at the same time. And his message was always about being resilient and fighting through to the very end, because you never knew when things were going to turn around. And he liked to tell stories by using people in the past. He loved, when he was a young professional, to go watch the matches. The way, people would go through regionally, the players would travel and play Mondays and Tuesday matches, and it was a big deal. And he took those opportunities to learn from the very best players, and he relayed those experiences to me. So he loved to share the stories of great players, of things he learned from them, and to be able to pass them down to me. But his underlying story was always, or his underlying message was always, you have to outgut everybody. You have to have a will to win, and you have to be the one that says, nope, I'm not going to give in.
Remarkable. Great reviews. Nora O'Donnell, the CBS anchor, says it's a must-read book. Jimmy Roberts from NBC says it's, part diary, part instruction, and it's a page turner that turns a scrapbook into life. What kind of feedback do you get?
It's been remarkable. And some of the really neat ones have been that readers have reconnected with mentors in their lives. That
Wow.
Those are pretty powerful.
Those
are really
incredible.
powerful.
Yes.
So that's been great. And these are people that are pretty far up in the golf world, and they've just taken this as a kind of a reminder, and maybe it's part of the time that we're living in too, just to reconnect with the people and the places that mean so much. And it was really, really amazing. I had a guy reach out in Indianapolis. He bought the leather bound version, and he said it would be so good to be able to get this in the hands of kids. Because part of why I did the paperback version was so that, for less than $20, kids can have this 208 pages on 100-weight paper and have a significant book. And he called up and he said, I'll take 100. Now you figure out where they have to go.
Wow.
So as it turns out, Brookhaven, Mr. Pulver's course right near here, guess how many kids they had in their summer camps this year?
100.
100. Too many things lined up too well. So those kids each got a book out of signing up for their camp. And it's a great story too, because PGA Junior League has been really at a big core of how they've really gotten so much involvement. They started out, I think it was 7 years ago, just 13 kids. And now they had over 100 in the two camps. They had to break up the camps because they had so many kids, and they had two PGA Junior League teams. So this came from nothing 7 years ago, and they've got themselves a really great little program up there now.
Isn't that wonderful how you set out to do something that, is personal to you, and all of these, moments happen for other people that you never would have anticipated.
Yeah,
We never really know what kind of effect we have on others, and for you to be able to find out those things, that's exciting.
People have left message on social media. They've taken time to write their own letters, and I've saved all of them.
How can viewers get a hold of this book?
It's on my own website at dottiepepper.net. It's also in the Northstar bookstore here in Saratoga Springs, and it's northstar.com. They've had it in both hardback and softcover from day one. They've been an amazing supporter. I didn't go to Amazon because I wanted to keep it small. I wanted to keep it personal. Part of it is because of what Amazon charges you to have something on their site, and there's a lot of hoops to jump through. But I wanted to be true to sort of his organic ways of learning and doing things, and having a touch on the product that you really are putting out there. And I got another letter, and I'm actually going to read it at a speech I have to give a couple of weeks from now. It was one that George's widow, Shelley, so the youngest child, who's since passed, wrote to one of his members, and they were talking back in the early 50s. There was still a golf ball shortage, and coming out of, it was a combination of World War II and the Korean War, and how there were allocations and the supply chain was broken. And this is his PS so he was trying to buy a lot more golf balls, and knew from the previous season that he couldn't do it. So he was just getting as many as he possibly could from every supplier he possibly could. He couldn't just load up on Titleist. He couldn't just load up on Wilson or Spalding or anything like that. So the PS in it was, tell so-and-so, the member, so he would be in his best interest to bring his relic clubs back north from Florida, so I can fit him with a proper set of golf clubs. It's just classic Mr. Pulver. Then you throw this little zing in the PS at the very end.
Obviously, you're nowhere near the the final lap here, but you've up to this point, what is it that makes you most proud, that you go, yeah, that was pretty good?
Of where my career is right now?
You get to pick.
I think my place at the Masters is where I'm most proud of where I am in my professional life right now. Being the first woman to call live golf there, sitting at the 13th. So I had the 4th hole and the 13th hole, and was decided to do interviews for the first couple of seasons. And then to be the first person on the ground there when they've never had a walking reporter, that was a lot of pressure. And it's also a really hard walk. It's a really hard walk, especially carrying the gear around that we've had to. That was pretty proud moment. And then when they decided to do it again, after doing it in 20 for the first time, as the COVID Masters, I suppose, and then to do it again in 21 was it was quite a feather in my cap, and I'm pretty proud of that. So a little story about that. The 21, we had a pretty significant rain delay Thursday morning coming first round. They got a few players off the tee in November, and then it all came crashing down. So I ended up being assigned to cover Tiger finishing on Thursday, and he was playing a really good round of golf. I cut up from 13 to 14, and I'm cutting across the fairway because I know it's easier to call the shot from left at 14. And I cut behind him, and he turned around, he stopped dead in his tracks, Frank, and he said, "Wait, you're on the ground here?" And I said, "It's so 2020, isn't it?" And he just started laughing. He goes, "Darn if it isn't."
Oh, that's
Just
cool.
yeah, it was a pretty cool moment.
How would you like to be remembered, Dottie?
I hope that doesn't happen for a while yet. So give me some time to think on that. I don't know if I've ever really thought about that. But I don't know. As far as a player, I think I left some opportunities out there, but I did okay. As far as an announcer, I hope people thought that I just kind of brought a player's perspective, a little honesty, a little sarcasm at times, but crashed through a couple of barriers. Or actually, maybe I took the lead and I just followed my blocker, Judy Rankin, and just carried the ball maybe a little closer to the end zone.
You know, I never met Mr. Pulver, but I would imagine that Mr. Pulver would be very proud, not only for your decorated playing career, but also for the way you live your life as a professional and as an inspiration and role model for all those young girls aspiring to be just like Dottie. So well done.
Thank you. Well, Madeline, his daughter, said to me when we first started chatting about the possibilities of all of this and how it was getting bigger, she said, "Oh, my dad would be so embarrassed." And I said, "Well, that's our goal. We should embarrass him."
Well done. Dottie, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. You know, I've watched you from afar for years, and I've always thought she's pretty cool. Yeah, well, you know, I was right. So
Well,
thanks very much.
thank you for the time.
I appreciate it. Bye.